Recently, I got a Dreamcast again, having not had one in well over a decade, and have been playing a load of my old favourite games on it. Jet Set Radio, Soul Calibur, Phantasy Star Online, and, well, I can't exactly surprise you with this one, Crazy Taxi. The only thing I really remembered about the game was the music, but after playing it again now, and this might come as a surprise to you, but Crazy Taxi, the critically acclaimed arcade classic oft regarded as one of the greatest driving games ever made, is actually pretty fun. It's really fast-paced, pushing you to drive at your very limit to get as much money as possible, driving full pelt around corners without braking with its tight as hell turning circles as you dodge and weave in and out of traffic, or if you're me, dodge and weave directly into traffic and laugh at how comedically sped up every collision looks. It's almost as if the game doesn't want you wasting time getting stuck on the obstacles it put down for you. Just hurry up, push through that traffic, and follow that arrow like your life depends on it, as it blasts the Offspring and Bad Religion at you. Because the perfect complement to such a bright and vibrant, classic sunny blue sky and white beach Sega-ass game are songs about child abuse and teenage pregnancy. The game was an instant hit, not only spawning its own series, but also its own series of rip-offs, like the Simpsons Road Rage, a game so blatant in its ripping off that they literally got sued by Sega for making it. So obviously, with this fast-paced, bright, colourful game, with big cities to race through and a soundtrack so iconic that it's basically cursed every single attempt to re-release the game to be negatively reviewed because they can't get the rights to the music anymore, clearly what everyone was asking for was a version of Crazy Taxi on a console that had no chance of being able to do any of that. Except no one was asking for that. And yet, here we are. Crazy Taxi Catch a Ride is a real game for the Gameboy Advance that exists, and not to be left out, truly setting out to rip off everything Crazy Taxi did. The Simpsons Road Rage also got a GBA port. So, can the Simpson do what Say couldn't? Let's find out in this episode of Port Patrol, the show where we look at weird and interesting ports and spin-offs of our favourite games, and any game that would dare rip off our favourite games, as we take a look at Crazy Taxi Catch a Ride and The Simpsons Road Rage for the Game Boy Advance. Released in 2003 and developed by Graphic State, Crazy Taxi Catch a Ride, which I will not be calling it for the rest of this video, is more or less a one-to-one conversion of the Dreamcast original. So if there's one thing you can't fault this game for, basically the only thing you can't fault the game for, it's ambition. Pretty much everything from the original is here. It has both maps, with the same distinct landmarks and layouts even if they have been graphically crushed nearly beyond all recognition. It has all 4 taxi drivers to play as, lots of traffic to avoid crashing into, and lots of needy passengers who all, right this very second, need a taxi to take them on their important trip to the popcorn store. There's even the crazy box missions, though admittedly there are a lot less of them here, so yeah, pretty much everything, shut up. Unfortunately, that ambition is pretty much where the good things about this game start and end. It is insane, wild, dare I even say crazy, what they tried to pull off here. And just like so many other impressive Game Boy Advance games I've talked about on this channel, made with a really small team too. I really need to be upfront saying just how much of a good job they did, all things considered, seeing that the idea of converting Crazy Taxi to the Game Boy 1-to-1 in full 3D was basically a doomed idea to begin with. There was no way that it was ever going to play well on the GBA, even with the most talented developers in the world, which by all accounts, these guys seemed pretty high up there. This is genuinely one of the most impressive things I've ever played on the console, but not even they could make the game not run like a sloppy, stuttery mess, because it was always going to be a sloppy, stuttery mess because it's so hard to make 3 dimensions run well on the GBA. 3D on the GBA in a fully explorable open world with traffic is even harder, and so we end up with a game that ran at 60 frames per second on the Dreamcast, running here at times as low as 8, and even at best, barely scraping the 20s. This rapidly varying frame rate means that frame times are all over the place as well, making it so stuttery as the game speeds up and slows down, it's impossible to get any sense of speed, which was something that made the original so thrilling. It's virtually pointless to talk about any aspect of how the game plays because of this. It could be a perfect match to the original, but with such wildly fluctuating speeds, it's going to feel like shit regardless. Virtually pointless, but I mean, when has that ever stopped me? So how does it play then, underneath all that frame rate jankiness? Fine for the most part, I think. The best way to describe it is probably loose. In the original, you could easily go around tight corners without letting go of the accelerator, whereas here it's almost a bit more realistic. Like, you will have to brake when going around most tight bends here, but I don't mean that in a good or a bad way, it's just different. Though what is bad is that even with the way looser steering and wider turning circle in this game, is how finicky it is to make fine adjustments. It feels like even the lightest tap of the D-pad made me turn way further than I wanted to, which made dodging and weaving through traffic way harder than it would have been normally, which even then was also way harder than it should have been in the first place because of all the cars being 2D. So trying to gauge stuff like distance and perspective was not a thing you can really actually do. Hell, the perspective on some of these sprites also just look way off in some cases. Like, a lot of the time the vans look like they're going to start driving off into thin air, which makes navigating this one particular thin stretch of road very, very annoying, which I had to do a lot while playing this game because of how easy it is just to get stuck in a loop of delivering people to the same places over and over again. On 2 runs, I basically got trapped in one corner of the map because I would pick someone up, drive them to where they wanted to be dropped off, and then the next person I picked up there would just want to go back to where I'd just come from, over and over again. So if you get bored of seeing this one particular road while watching this video, well, welcome to about 6 hours of my life recently. When it isn't forcing me into my least favourite part of the map though, I can't deny that even with everything this game has going against it, which is a lot, let's be honest, I was still able to have some fun. Sometimes. Bad Crazy Taxi is, after all, still Crazy Taxi, even when it is incredibly blocky looking, and so drab looking that when I try to visualise this game in my mind when I'm not playing it, all I can envision is the colour grey, maybe with a greyish blue sky, and greyish yellow car. I know I'm not the sprightly young 24-year-old I was last time I played a 3D GBA game, but man, I found it a lot harder to tell what the hell I was looking at here than I normally do when playing stuff like this. I think that feeling might just be because in a lot of other 3D GBA games, it's not as important to really be able to see what you're looking at, if that makes any sense. Like in Doom, Big Mother Truckers, and Smashing Drive, the little details don't matter. You only need a glimpse of enemy colours in Doom to know what is and isn't something you need to shoot at, and in the other two games you just smash through traffic anyway, so you aren't paying attention to every small thing. So in these games you're just focused on big, easily identifiable things like the layout of a room, or the way the road bends. Here, you not only have to try and navigate the city, but also pay attention to all of those small details, because that random jumbled mess of static on the horizon could suddenly turn into a car you need to avoid. Made it very tiring on my eyes, and it's very obviously lower resolution than the actual Game Boy screen, which definitely didn't help. It just added to the list of things about the game that was already grating on me. Just the fact it's not nice to look at. Such a drab, boring game compared to how vibrant the original was. There is some nice stuff going on here. I love the sprite work on the car and how it warps and wobbles, giving off a pretty convincing feeling of the suspension at work. I just hate the colour choice so much. It's all so pale and the buildings all look oddly realistic and just add to that boring colour scheme. It's enough to make you want to fall asleep, so it's a good thing that this game has a secret weapon to keep you awake. The snare drum that is so loud it felt like it would burst my fucking eardrum at any moment. As much as I wished that this was gonna be another Need for Speed Underground, where it actually had the original music tracks, just horribly compressed, and something that people to this day would still comment about calling you a pussy for not wanting to risk flagging YouTube's copyright strikes because you didn't play any of it in your own video. No, it's all original music here, like Poundland recreations of the original soundtrack. And in a way, it's quite cute, because the songs are so similar to the original ones, you can pretty much tell which song here is meant to be which in the original, but also I just hate listening to all of them. Too much snare drum, too much cowbell, and just like the original game, you'll easily listen to them multiple times in one run. It's all so grating, and only worsened by the game itself basically refusing to end and put you out of your visual and musical misery. The timer is too generous, way more than it was in the original. Some journeys adding over 2 minutes of extra time, which is just insane. On some runs, I didn't run out of time. I genuinely just had to stop playing because I didn't want to play anymore. If you had more resilience than any human being should ever have, you could probably, clear the entire map, every single passenger that you could possibly pick up. You could easily do it, but for me, 40 minutes is about all I could take. This is on the normal difficulty as well. You could make it even easier if you wanted to, and if you do want to, you should be put on a list or something, because... oh, why? And that's basically Crazy Taxi for the GBA. Like I said, what they were trying to achieve was basically doomed from the start, but the fact they got so far with it is really impressive. I don't really have much else to add on top of that, though I will say it's the only GBA game I've ever seen that has loading screens in it. That's kind of wild, right? I also love this old interview with one of the developers, where the interviewer, seeing Crazy Taxi on the GBA, was genuinely like, hey, you should make some new on this thing. What the fuck? The studio that worked on it all seemed like cool people, and they all enjoyed working on it too from what I can see, which is really nice. But nowadays, there isn't a lot here to come back to. Sure, it's quite novel to see, but when you're actually playing it, all you're left with is a stuttery game, and a whole lot of grey. Grey, grey, grey. Never-ending repeated buildings over and over again. and a soundtrack that feels like it will make you go deaf if you listen to it for too long. Definitely really cool, but you've seen it here. You really don't have to experience it for yourself. If only there was some way we could know how a game like this would turn out if they went for something more like, I don't know why I'm trying to hype this bit up, you all know what's coming next. The Simpsons Road Rage is a Crazy Taxi-like, which is to say, so much like Crazy Taxi they got sued by Sega for making it. There is way too much history to dive into there to fit into this video about the Game Boy version, which is definitely way less interesting than that, so I'm just going to throw this video by Fami on screen that explains it way better than I could, and awkwardly ask that you don't watch the video that's way better than mine right now and come back to GBA land, as much as your eyes are begging you not to right now. Much like Crazy Taxi, it involves driving around as fast as you can, picking up passengers and dropping them off elsewhere in the map, and seeing how averagely it reviewed. I wasn't expecting that much from it, but I actually had a lot of fun. It's definitely nowhere near as polished as what it's copying. I often found myself randomly crashing into invisible walls out of nowhere, but it's alright. Cars are snappy as hell and great to drive, fun to throw around corners with handbrake turns, and there are a load of characters to play with, all with completely different handling cars. You have all-rounders like Homer, which are good at everything, big hitters like Barney that are awful to steer but are so heavy you can plow through traffic no problem, and piddly drivers like Grandpa who are fast as hell but so light you can get flung about just by driving at a curb wrong. Lots of levels too. There's like 6 maps to play through, which is way more than Crazy Taxi offered. Not all of them are good, but still. The urban maps like Evergreen Terrace and the Entertainment District are great. Lots of routes to drive around, and so incredibly dense with references and callbacks to the show, it makes them a joy to drive through. And then on the other hand you have stuff like the Dam, where there's only a few locations to go and even fewer routes to take you there, and the Power Plant, where like half the destinations are all centered on one tiny part of the map. Overall though, yeah, I liked it. I wouldn't rate it as harshly as some at the time did, at least. A lot of my enjoyment probably comes from how when I'm not sat comatose in front of my computer editing videos, I'm sat comatose on my sofa watching Simpsons reruns, so I understood and laughed at basically every reference I found here. I imagine this game would do absolutely nothing for you if you had never watched The Simpsons before. I also think, in a weird way, this game's humour has probably gotten better as it's aged. It has such an insane energy to it. You can tell either the writers of the show weren't involved, or just didn't care all that much, so all the characters say the most unhinged things they'd never actually say in the show.
I still ain't tipping yet, I'm Scottish.
That poor man. I hope someone does kill him.
Take me to Grandma's world. I'm horny.
Don't sit on my handheld.
Plus, the pace of the game, the circus clown-esque music playing in the background, how maps get more cluttered and chaotic the longer you play on it as props and scenery fall and litter the roads, the constant beeping timer, racing against the clock and the same repeated voice lines being unable to keep up with the action so they're reacting to stuff that happened like 20 seconds ago, it just keeps grinding you down more and more. Something which I imagine 20 years ago would have just been annoying, but now so closely matches the same energy those Zoomer humour videos have that my brain just had no idea what to do, getting so overloaded with shit that I couldn't help but break down laughing so many times when playing the game. I think Germa would literally die if he played this game, is the vibe I get from it.
SpongeBob!
And I know saying, this game was so overwhelming I literally had to take breaks from it, isn't exactly a great selling point. Well, it is what it is, I guess. Stupid, funny time all around. I had a blast playing it, even when the constantly repeating looping deliveries got more and more repetitive. Not as good as Crazy Taxi, but still pretty good.
That's a spicy meatball!
You're faster than Joey Heatherton.
And the GBA version is even better. Released 2 years after the console versions, it was developed by Ultron and published by THQ, making both Crazy Taxi and its rip-off both published by the same company on the Gameboy Advance. Rather than go for a direct one-to-one remake approach, or demake I think would probably be the better word there, the game instead feels more built from the ground up for the Game Boy Advance, and is way better off for it. Instead of chunky, slow 3D, we have this funky Mode 7-ass approach with added inclines and slopes to really help sell the effect. No idea how they did it, or how this works. I don't think I've really seen another game do something like this before, outside of like a really weird Speed Racer game on the SNES that did something similar. But hey, it looks really cool. And all of this running 6 times better than what Crazy Taxi was doing in some places, at a smooth 60 frames per second. I feel like every other video I make the joke of, well the game's 60 FPS but I only upload in 30 so you can't see it, ho. I'm starting to think I should just start uploading in 60 FPS. But then games like Crazy Taxi make me think that it would definitely not be worth it. Now, that isn't to say there aren't downsides to this approach over what Crazy Taxi did. It is definitely a lot more confusing trying to tell where you're going in this game, discerning what you can and cannot drive over or into, which led to a lot of annoying moments where I thought I was taking a cheeky shortcut, but just ended up slamming into a wall. The game does add some scenery and building sprites at the side of the road to at least add the suggestion of a cityscape and obstacles to avoid, but it doesn't really help too much. It really is a case of trial and error, memorizing what is what on every map, which doesn't sound great, but I guess the game being what it is, you're going to be playing the same maps over and over again anyway, so it isn't unreasonable to ask you to remember where you can drive, and I will gladly take this over this any day. Because it means the game is an absolute blast to play, incredibly fast and snappy, easily bringing the excitement and tension that Crazy Taxi was so boringly missing. Handbrake turns are satisfying as hell to pull off, and the game is constantly throwing curveballs at you to try and mix it up, whether that be asking you to try and avoid traffic for a round or purposely crash into it. Which is when you realise that if you ram into the back of a car, you actually get a jump from it. It's so much fun. The maps as well are also all pretty good. I don't think there's really any levels that stuck out to me like the original as being particularly worse than the others. They aren't one-to-one recreations, but borrow the rough layout of the original games while adding their own spin to it as well, like adding a highway that encircles the entertainment district, which acts like a massive speed booster. There's loads of sneaky dirt paths to follow off the beaten track for shortcuts, tunnels which can take you to other parts of the map, and the damn level even has an underground cave system, which I could not figure out for the life of me, and killed every run I entered it in. Highly recommended not doing that. The system behind picking up and dropping off passengers is also different here too, probably because they didn't want to be sued again. Gone is the giant pointing hand, and replaced by an arrow that, if you're lucky, you might even be able to tell what the fuck it's even trying to say. And instead of passengers being scattered around the map, there are now, like, 7 or 8 dedicated pilot wings looking ass drop-off zones, which always have 2 people you can pick up when you drive off. At first I didn't like this change. My favourite thing about the original games was going to all the random places the passengers would want you to, and I thought having so few places to go on the map would limit how many routes there were to drive through, and would get really repetitive. To a degree, I'm not wrong. but it's also not like even with all the extra drop of points those two games had, it still didn't become repetitive and would have lots of repeat journeys, so it honestly made less of a difference than I thought it would from that perspective. But this new system's pretty cool, because it also grades you on how close to the centre of the target you stop. Wow, it really is Pilot Wings. And that added a whole new dimension to the game, leading to loads of runs where I was hanging on by a thread, only managing to keep going and saving myself from being so good at parking right on that centre point, making back that extra time. It's really fun. It wasn't long before I was planning routes in my head with who I would pick up from what place, and juggling passengers in and out of the car to try and maximise my time. It was addicting in a way that I latched onto way more than both the original Road Rage and even the original Crazy Taxi. And that fun gameplay is also supported by what a joy this game is to look at, listen to, and play through. Considering how utterly cursed the original was to look at, damn, what a cute-ass Simpsons game this is. Everything is absolutely adorable. Cute little cars, cute little maps, and cute little character portraits showing who you've picked up. I mean, what the hell? I think Kent Brockman and Molman are cute. A sentence that has never been uttered by mankind before now, I can tell you that much. Everything is so colourful and warm, such a pleasing colour palette. The way it looks, it almost, this is how stupid, kind of anime-esque. I mean, the developers for the game are Japanese, but just how all the characters are off-model enough, looking rounder, warmer, happier, softer. It gives off that kind of cutesy anime vibe. The music is also Japanesey as heck, sounding straight out of a Super Nintendo RPG at times. Reminds me of games like Tetris Battle Gaiden. The Civilization port, also made by Japanese developers. Even Ape Escape in some ways even. None of those were RPGs, and one of them wasn't even on the SNES, but you get what I mean, right? It was a soundtrack I wasn't expecting from the game, especially after the, I think I described it as clown music in the original. But nah, these songs are happy as hell. Just made me feel warm inside listening to them, and stuck around in my head for long after I finished playing. Finally, I guess the last thing I want to touch on is this game's mission mode. The original had one too, but it was pretty lame. Kinda just repurposing what they had done for the Road Rage mode in any way they could. Every mission being either you delivering a passenger somewhere, or crashing into X amount of Y before the timer was over. But the GBA version goes out of its way to not only add unique mission types, but unique maps to go along with them. In the original, Snake's mission was just crashing into 12 barrels scattered across the map, but now it's a race against the clock through a precarious mountainside road, F-Zero GX style. Otto now has his own racetrack to pass his driving test in. In the original, it was just driving into some light posts. Krusty's mission in the original was just knocking over 15 road signs, but now is a fucking gauntlet, beast of a level, a 3-stage mammoth of a race against the clock, as you have to tightrope walk, or drive I guess, jump through rings of fire, and balance yourself on top of a ball as you get through a maze, all in one life. It's such a good mode, even if the final mission does let it down a little bit. They very obviously designed the level before realising the AI to chase you down couldn't navigate it and just made it all completely flat and thus really easy. But for doing it all, you unlock the palette swapper, which lets you customise every colour of every character in the game. I call my abomination of a creation the Virtual Homer. Honestly, I have very little bad to say about this game. Unlocking things can feel a bit slow, perhaps. You'll have to do a few runs to unlock something new, and it doesn't save either, you have to keep track of passwords, but I mean, that's really it. It's just a really good game. Definitely a lot more fun than the perhaps more impressive but definitely less enjoyable Crazy Taxi game. I can appreciate what they were trying to do, but if you feel inspired to play either of these games, I definitely know which one I would suggest.